It's the thing about Buddhism that I think most Westerners have the hardest time with. We're used to the idea of some sort of automatic salvation. Repeat the formula and boom, you're in. It's not like that in Buddhism. It's hard work. And the ball is always in your court. You're always in control. But the good side of that is, well, there's every good side of that, but the best side of that, the obviously best side of that, is that when the ball is in your court, there is no external blessing that you should wait upon. There is no powerlessness. There is no helplessness. There is no not knowing what the score is. There is no incompetence, should you choose to really deepen within your practice. If you experience and claim for yourself pure devotion and practice that devotion to the depth of your being, you have the power to go as far as anyone has ever gone. You have the power to be a Buddha. From the point of view of devotion for the teacher, in order to really accomplish this devotion, we cannot rely on an emotional experience. This is a real problem for Westerners. We are very emotional people. It doesn't always show because we seem so sophisticated. But believe me, we are extremely emotional people. But we should begin immediately to cultivate a more solid understanding of what we are seeing in front of us when we see the teacher, when we see the Lama. Because when we see the Lama, we have to decide for ourselves, first of all, is the teacher teaching in a pure way? That is to say, is the teacher genuinely interested in cultivating some ripening within us? Can you tell from the teacher's mannerism that they are doing what they can to ripen our minds? Is the teacher then acting for our benefit? Or is the teacher, say, giving a teaching for some impure reason, which can be a sense of, I don't know, power or a sense of, and it happens, this is Kali Yuga, a sense of, for some different reason. Is the teacher genuinely concerned with the welfare of others? And in order to see that, one would have to examine the teacher's life. Really. Maybe not every personal detail. You don't need to know what the teacher eats for breakfast or what they do in their most private, perhaps family moments. But look at the form of the life. Can you see that the Lama's life has been constantly moving toward reaching out to and benefiting more and more beings? Can you see that? And you must determine whether the teacher is qualified according to the teachings. That is to say, that does the teacher have the blessings of the lineage? You need to know that the teacher is qualified, that they have been empowered with the blessings of the lineage, and you need to determine for yourself whether those empowerments of the lineage or whether that blessing of the lineage has been transferred in some proper and authentic way. And you need to determine for yourself as well whether the teacher is teaching teachings that actually come from the very mind of enlightenment. That is to say, are they the Buddha's teachings? Are they that? And you need to determine for yourself whether or not the teacher is there are actually a couple of different things that one can examine. Either is the teacher extremely learned and therefore able to confer the blessing of the teachings in a very academic and traditional way, as in the case of a qualified Kempo in our tradition? Or is the teacher somehow realized enough within their own mind that the teaching associated with the mind of enlightenment naturally flows forth and is transferred in such a way that one can understand and that actually brings benefit? But even if that were the case, that teacher must have the blessings of the lineage. It cannot be some kind of renegade thing where suddenly, someone has an insight 20 years ago and they teach for 20 years and no one's achieved realization. You must be clear what you're actually approaching, really understanding what you're actually approaching. And then you should look to see whether the teacher's life is about compassion, whether the teacher teaches compassion, and whether their demonstration is one of compassion. These are just some of the things that you should choose. And of course you have to examine for yourself, is the teaching actually available to me on a personal level? That is to say that, supposing you had a highly qualified, let's say, Tibetan Lama, and there were no translator, which hardly ever happens, but if that were the case, well, what good would it do you? You could come up and get the blessing and be touched on the head perhaps, but you really couldn't take so much teaching. And so even though the Lama was pure and highly qualified, that might not be the best instance for you. On the other hand, supposing there was something about the teacher's mannerism that, according to your karma, was so very difficult and so abrasive to you that you just cannot open up to them. And even though you gave it a period of effort, where you actually tried, it was simply not compatible. Or it would seem that with this teacher you could never quite get to them. Perhaps they were not available enough, or it would seem that some obstacle would rise up and keep you from that teacher. In that case, you need to look for a different circumstance. So these are very personal things that one must consider. But upon securing the precious relationship with a teacher, what do you actually have? What's yours then? In order to explain what you actually have, you should look for yourself on general terms to see the condition of sentient beings. You should look for yourself to see the condition of cyclic existence. And again and again and again, in just about every teaching that I give, I remind students to examine the faults of cyclic existence. This isn't my brilliant idea. This is the teaching of the Buddha. You must examine the conditions of cyclic existence to see that all of cyclic existence is pervaded with suffering. To see that we know how to engage in activity, but whether we will produce suffering or happiness is pretty much 50-50. It's up in the air. We do not actually know how to produce happiness. If it were so, we would consistently produce it. But we do not understand how to produce happiness. We always engage in activities that produce mixed results. The reason for that is that we do not understand yet that cyclic existence is pervaded with suffering, and we do not understand that the only true cessation of suffering is enlightenment itself. That is to say, the mind in such a condition of luminosity and purity and non-contrivance, such a realization of its own primordial empty state, such stability within that state, that there are actually no building blocks by which to create suffering. That is the only true cessation of suffering. The condition of ordinary perception, the condition of cyclic existence as we understand it, is always pervaded with suffering. So having examined that, we see the necessity of achieving realization to be as imperative, as strong, if not stronger, than the compulsion to survive in the way that we understand survival. We must understand this teaching to be as relevant, as important as the very air that we breathe. Would you ever consider stop breathing? Would you ever just wake up and say, I don't feel like breathing today? Would you ever do that? Well, with the same regard, you should think that it is impossible to not continue in your effort toward realization. It's like that.